Hey, this is Professor Harvey, and this is lesson 4 for our ethical hacking class. So let's dive right in. The first piece here is a review of what we covered last week. So last week we talked about reconnaissance and the reconnaissance phase of pen testing. And the thing we said makes reconnaissance what it is that reconnaissance is no touch, right? In other words, we're not touching or actually entering the place or the network that we are doing reconnaissance on. So, we're not actually sending any packets in the network. Everything we're doing to research it is in open sources. That's what OSINT stands for, right? So this is open source research. Social media research is a big piece of that. So last week was reconnaissance and social media. Today we're moving on and talking about scanning and probing. So this is also still reconnaissance in the sense that we're gathering information, but we're no longer in strictly no-touch mode. So we are going to go beyond that sort of no-touch information gathering and do some information gathering where we actually put our virtual hands on the network in terms of actually sending packets into the network, even though we're not going to, so we're sending packets into the network. We're not going to actually try to break in or anything like that right now. We're still just gathering information, but we are going to do active scanning and probing to see what's there, figure out what's going on, what's available, what the network looks like that we're getting at. So phase 1, the reconnaissance phase, we figured out what the network IP ranges are of the target network. We might have found through open source research what some of the key systems of interest are, the technologies that they use. And because of what we found in social networking, we may have found some potential passwords, because by just doing research on the people involved, technologies, we'll know some information about possible passwords, or what the roots of passwords will be. Like, for instance, often shared passwords used by an IT department are often incorporate the name of the company or an abbreviated name of the company, or other common phrases that are important to the company like that because they're very memorable. And so those are things we might have learned. So we've done the digital equivalent here of sort of walking around and looking, and now we're going to actually be doing the digital equivalent of jiggling the doorknob, checking the windows to see what's unlocked, that sort of thing. So scanning and probing, we're using automation because otherwise this is going to be very, very slow. So first we're going to just try to figure out what are active systems within the network range, right? So if we have, if a company has a certain number of IP addresses, chances are that a lot of those are inactive at any given time, that only some systems are active and most of the other systems are not active. So we are going to be scanning, trying to figure out which systems are actually actively in use on the network, which systems actually answer to a ping, which systems which IP addresses have something there. Right? A lot of times, the majority of network addresses, there's just really nothing there using that address. It's sort of an unused address. So we want to figure out what's active, and then once we've identified those active systems, we want to check for what ports are active, what ports respond. For each open port, what kind of software is in use, what version of that software is in use, what the operating system is, as well as the actual service software that's being used there, right? So this is known as enumeration, right? We're enumerating the system, figuring out what's there, getting a footprint, right? So these are different terms that are not exactly synonymous, but somewhat synonymous. I mean, they all are related to this effort. So scanning looks like this, right? We have a network range. These two examples are pretty disparate kinds of things, right? One of them is Apple, right? They've got a massive network, /8 size network, whereas Howard Community College, whereas Howard Community College has a /23 here, right? So it's 512 different possible addresses, whereas Apple's got like 16 some million, and this is just one of their network ranges. So a network range, some are larger, some are smaller. So most often what you're using is the ping command to determine if there's an active machine at a given address. The problem, however, so that's the most sort of basic thing to do to figure out if something is online. The problem is that a lot of firewalls will block pings to the systems that are behind the firewall, even if the address is actually actively in use and there's something there. It doesn't allow it to respond to pings. The pings never even make it past the firewall to the system. So there's potentially up to 65,000 TCP ports. So the point is that, like for instance, a web server might be there on that IP address. It might be listening on port 80, port 443, even though it won't respond to ping. So most often TCP is what we're scanning for, and there are UDP services out there. But scanning for UDP, especially through a firewall, just scanning for UDP in general is not nearly as useful, and we'll see why. It has to do with the way that UDP works. Right, so if we're looking for 16 million some addresses, pinging all those addresses might be difficult, whereas if it's only 512 addresses we're looking at in our target network, that's not so bad. But really ping is going to be useful for those 16 million, because pinging is a lot easier than actually testing actual responding of network hosts on different ports. And you'll see what I mean in a moment here. So just to review a little bit about how TCP works, right? We have the three-way handshake process, right? SYN. So if I want to start a conversation, I send a SYN, a synchronization packet. The server responds with a synchronization of its own and acknowledges my synchronization. I respond with an acknowledgement of their synchronization. To shut down a TCP conversation, right, we have the FIN versus ACK. And the key thing is to remember the difference between FIN and ACK. We actually mentioned this last week as well. Right? FIN means, hey, I want to end this conversation. Whereas ACK just means this conversation's over. I'm sorry, not ACK. Reset. Right? So the FIN, this whole FIN ACK, FIN ACK process, this four-step shutdown is kind of the polite way to end a conversation when you're done talking with a host. When a host wants to just abruptly stop a session, it just sends a reset, and that's it, and it never responds to anything else from the other side. So this is what those look like: SYN, SYNACK, ACK to open a connection, FIN, FINACK, and then FIN, ACK. Right. So this is the four-way handshake to shut down. So Nmap is by far the most widely used tool out there that's used in real world by both ethical hackers and real world bad guys alike, because it's a very well-known, very established, very mature, widely available and reliable scanning tool. And here's some examples of screenshots from movies. It was featured in the second Matrix movie. Some people claim that this is the first movie to show a real hacker tool with real commands. This is a screenshot from what was on the screen there. You can see the password was Zion 101 or Zion 0101. And so these are real Nmap commands running there in the movie The Matrix. So Nmap is short for Network Mapper. It's been around for a long time. It was written by a guy named Fyodor, and initially he just went by his sort of hacker name of Fyodor, and nobody knew who he was. Eventually, he kind of came out publicly. His name is Gordon Lyon, but his hacker name is Fyodor. That's how he's still kind of known in the community. And Nmap has a lot of capabilities for scanning both quickly and reliably and flexibly to find out what's available on a network. This is sort of a mind map of all the different options that are available. the scanning options, scanning type, ping options. All this is available at the help menu in Nmap if you forget it, but this is actually a pretty helpful way of looking at it because it gives all the options based on what they have to do with, right? Discovery options or ping options, OS detection, all the different parts of the command that you would use to launch Nmap. So the most common way you're going to try to use Nmap is with a connection scan. This is where you're sending a TCP request and making a connection with the other side. It's not stealthy because you're making a complete connection with the other side. So you're trying every different port on that host. Port number 2, try it. Port number 3, try it. Port number 4, try it until you actually get answers from some of them. But it completes the connection. So you send a SYN, the server, if it sends an ACK, you send a SYN ACK, it sends a SYN ACK and you send an ACK back, and you're completing a connection. The more common way you actually want to do this is with just a SYN scan. And what that means is you send a SYN, a synchronization request, to each port on a server, that you're scanning. And if the server replies with a SYN ACK, Nmap makes a note of that fact, and it remembers it, so you get a report of which ports responded. But it never sends that final ACK, which means it never actually establishes a connection. So A, that saves time because there's one less packet that has to go out, but also it often isn't logged because a lot of systems, including a lot of firewalls, will only log a connection if it's an actual connection. And since in this case the connection is never completed, it's not logged as a connection. Other ways you can scan for ports are by sending just a FIN. So if you send a FIN, that's like saying goodbye when you've never even said hello. Right? If you walk past someone in the hallway and they say goodbye, goodbye, right? It's weird. So if a port is closed, it will respond with a reset, because a closed port always sends a reset to everything because it's closed. So the whole when a machine receives any kind of traffic on a port that is closed, it's supposed to just respond with a reset. So no response means, well, why didn't it come back with a reset? If it was closed, it should come back with a reset. Since it didn't, that might be an open port. Or there might just not be any server there, or the firewall might be blocking it. So it's not as definitive as a SYN scan, but it can sometimes get past a firewall that would respond differently to a SYN scan. A Christmas tree scan is one that has multiple different bits set, different flags set. This is weird because no packet should ever have all those things, right? You can't push data on a packet when you're also shutting down a conversation at the same time. It doesn't make sense. So it's the same thing, and again, different systems will respond differently to this, and sometimes you'll get information this way that you wouldn't have gotten with a SYN scan. And then a null packet is one with no flags. None of the flag bits are set at all. And again, a closed port should respond with a reset, and an open port will generally not respond. So all three of these, you get the same kind of set of responses, but you could try all three and possibly get different answers. So if you're having trouble finding things behind a certain firewall or something, sometimes that's a way to get answers if you're not getting them through just a SYN scan in order to map the network. An ACK scan is another way of trying to get past a firewall. This used to work with older firewalls, because older firewalls, if you sent an ACK, it would say, well, this host is acknowledging something, so there must be some ongoing conversation happening because it's acknowledging, which means that the machine on the inside of the firewall must have sent traffic, because this looks like a response, and it just allows it. So since any packet with an ACK looks like a response, some firewalls will just allow it. That generally is not the case anymore. It really Only really old-fashioned firewalls will do that. And you can see here the logic of it is this. The logic of it is if a firewall is, if you're getting no answer, and then suddenly you get a reset back, that's different. So there's something different about that port. And so there must be something running on it, or the firewall at least is allowing it through, and you're getting a different response back. UDP, so scanning UDP services is a lot harder because a lot of UDP services, since UDP doesn't have that whole handshake phenomenon, unless you send a valid request to that UDP service, a lot of times you just get no answer at all. So so sort of generically, systems are supposed to send a ICMP report back, right? ICMP is the same protocol that ping uses, and so it should say port unreachable. But the fact is, most systems today, that's blocked, especially through a firewall. It just won't send those, and often you get no response at all. Another option in Nmap is the discovery option, right? Whether you want to use ping or not. By default, if you tell Nmap to scan a certain set of IP addresses, it'll try pinging all of them, and if they don't respond to a ping, it won't do the port scan on that IP address. However, when I'm mapping out a network, I want to try port scanning every IP, even if it doesn't respond to a ping, because my ping might be blocked by a firewall. So this SP says, ignore the fact that you're not getting a response to the ping and do it anyway. Wait a second. Anyway, so version detection, the option here is to say, not only do I want you to find out that there is something running on that port, but I want you to actually connect to that service and find out what version. So this will give you the banner, it's called, back from a service, and the banner will generally say, oh, I'm running, it'll say what kind of service it is, right? So FTP, there's multiple different companies or sources of FTP services that it could be running, so you can get an idea of what version of FTP software it's running. And then the last here is output. So you can get different forms of output out of Nmap. You can get the output in a file that's readable by humans, or a file that's just sort of parsable by machine, right? So there's some people will use other programs to they'll take the output of their Nmap scan and have it written out to this machine readable format, and then import it into a different tool that actually interprets and presents those results for you. Timing options for Nmap. So if you're trying to scan and be stealthy, you might want to do it a little slower, right? So these are from slower to faster, right? So T0 only sends one packet every 5 minutes, so it's very, very slow, right? It would take weeks to scan a network at that rate. Even sneaky is pretty slow. The normal speed is basically just as quickly as it can without it impeding its responses. Aggressive doesn't wait as long for an answer, so it will generally go even faster. And then the insane speed tends to miss things because it only waits a third of a second for a response before it just stops listening for a response and moves on to the next port. One thing to be aware of in the lab is that the paranoid setting is so slow that it would take you forever to complete the lab. So when there's an assignment to use this paranoid slow setting, you're going to want to limit the number of ports or which specific ports you're scanning, because just scanning 5 ports will take you 25 minutes. So you really want to kind of limit it, because if you just say, oh, scan this IP range, it'll be running for a week. So here's some examples of commands. I'm not going to linger on this. You can pause if you want to see them, or you can look at the download and look at the PowerPoint. But you can see the way that the different options are integrated. You can do, this is how you specify you want to do a SYN scan. The timing is specified. You're doing version checking. You're specifying what ports. Here, only looking at port 80. Here you're looking at 2 different ports, so you can specify which ports, and this is how you would do it with that paranoid scan to make it go faster, only scanning specific ports. So there's 2 different ways. So one other thing that Nmap can do for you is try to identify what the operating system is on the other side. So there's a number of things in TCP networking that aren't specified by the specifications for TCP, right? What is the default window size? What is the time to live value of a packet by default? What does it start out as, right? The highest it can be is 256, but most operating systems start out with a time to live of like 64. But different versions of Windows, Linux, Mac use different values for these. So just by looking at the packets, Nmap can get somewhat of an idea of what the operating system is. By sending specific different types of weird packets, like we showed before, some of those different Christmas tree scans and various different anomalous or weird combinations of things in packets, different types of operating systems will respond differently to those things. They'll either ignore this certain thing, or they'll send this type of response to this weird combination. And by sending a whole bunch of different things, Nmap can get a pretty good idea of what kind of operating system you're dealing with. However, most intrusion detection systems, this will be very obvious, right? By the way, one thing we didn't mention with the timing is the whole reason for doing it slower is to avoid being detected by an intrusion detection system. Intrusion detection systems are pretty good at detecting Nmap scans. In fact, most intrusion detection systems will specifically say, not only, hey, someone's scanning your network, it'll say, hey, someone's using Nmap with these settings to scan your network. But the thing about IDSs is they have to look at multiple different packets coming in and combine what they're seeing to figure out what it is. And they can only wait so long for a group of packets to come in and combine them to arrive at some kind of conclusion. So if the packets come in far enough apart, then it doesn't see a pattern anymore because it's stopped grouping them together and trying to build a pattern. So by sending things slow enough, and this is super duper slow, but even at the sneaky level, that's usually slow enough that often you won't be detected by an intrusion detection system. Active fingerprinting is you're sending weird traffic and you're way more likely to be detected by an intrusion detection system. These are some of the different things that get varied, that are manipulated and weird values sent in by Nmap in order to try to determine what operating system it's dealing with. Servers are generally, that version check, that -SV, is generally done by just grabbing a banner, right? That's a normal functionality when you connect to a service. The service will say, hey, I'm running such and such version of DNS services, what it's like the make and model and year of a car. And we'll give some examples of this. Defenses against scanning that you can implement in a network if you're a network administrator. You can block ICMP. We've seen that makes it ping scan ineffective and also renders UDP scanning almost impossible because you're not allowing those messages out. So blocking ICMP at your firewall tends to make scanning quite a bit more difficult. As far as port scanning goes, obviously removing unneeded services, that's good security advice for so many reasons. And using a good firewall will make it much harder to scan what's behind there, what's behind that firewall. So that's network scanning. And that's with Nmap. Wireless. So this slide is so old-fashioned. I mean, nobody does this anymore. This is something that 20 years ago you would see, or 18 years ago. That's about how long ago I remember first really getting into any kind of wireless networking was really new, like 18 years ago, Wi-Fi. And so people would walk around and sort of map out, like, oh, there's these wireless networks around our city. But these days, there's so many of them everywhere that you can go stand on any city corner and detect, dozens of them all over the place. And so there's lots of tools out there that will detect active Wi-Fi networks and sort of catalog them and tell you what the signal strength is of each given separate network. And some of these tools, I use one on my Mac that you can take multiple. What you can do is you can download a map, like a street map, and you can click on. You can walk to a certain place in the map and click on that place, and it'll detect all the networks there. It'll say, "Okay, I'm done." And then you walk to the next street corner and click on that on the map, and it will figure out where those networks are located based on how strong the signal is from different places. So by correlating, hey, this signal gets weaker when you're here and stronger when you're here, if you get several different points on the map, you can figure out where those signals are coming from pretty accurately. This is just a site that you can use to read what other people's scanning results have been and find out what Wi-Fi networks are available in a given place. So, Wi-Fi scanning is a thing. We will often do this as part of a physical security assessment because part of the on-site-ness of a location and the security of a physical place these days is, can I worm my way into your on-site Wi-Fi network if I'm physically there? So that's why this is included. So that's network scanning. The lab this week covers mostly Nmap with those different options, and that's what we have for this week. So hopefully that's good information, and we'll learn by example and from the lab how to use those Nmap options.